He closed his door to everyone until the Apache girl asked, "Are you looking for a wife or salvation?" He laughed easily, cared deeply for his friends and family, and believed in the goodness of people. But life had a way of teaching him lessons he was not ready for. Slowly, he began to experience loss after loss, one that shook the foundations of his trust in the world. The first time he felt the sting of real heartbreak, he did not understand it. He thought he could fix everything, make everyone happy, and in return, be happy himself. But people were not always kind in return, and promises could break without warning. At first, he tried to hide his pain behind a smile. He went about his daily life, meeting neighbors, attending family gatherings, and speaking with friends as if nothing had happened. But inside, a quiet sadness grew. He started noticing small things that made him uncomfortable. The way people talked behind each other's backs, the way friends forgot their promises, and the way the world could feel indifferent to someone's struggles. Every disappointment piled up like bricks on his shoulders. Eventually, the weight became too much. One by one, he began to retreat. He stopped going to the town market on busy days, no longer participating in community events and avoiding people who once mattered to him. He closed his heart slowly, then his home, and finally, his life. Friends stopped calling, thinking he was too busy or uninterested. Family members knocked on his door only to be met with polite refusals. They did not understand why he was pushing them away, and he could not find the words to explain. It was easier to be alone. His home, which had once been lively and welcoming, became quiet. The walls that once echoed laughter were now silent, except for the occasional sound of footsteps on wooden floors or the hum of a heater in winter. He would sit by the window, staring at the world outside, watching people go about their lives without knowing he existed. He saw children playing, couples laughing, and neighbors helping each other. There was a strange comfort in watching from afar. Life went on, and he felt like an observer rather than a participant. Days blurred into weeks and weeks into months. He kept to a strict routine. In the morning, he would wake up early, make tea, and sit quietly as the sun rose. He read books, wrote letters he never sent, and tended to a small garden outside. The garden was one of the few connections he still allowed himself. It reminded him that life could grow and bloom, even in silence. Meals were simple, usually just enough to fill him, and sometimes he went days without speaking to anyone. It was a life that many might call lonely, but for him, it was safe. He had built walls so strong around his heart that no one could reach him, and that gave him a sense of control he had lost long ago. Despite the calm exterior, there was always a quiet ache inside. Sometimes in the middle of the night, he would wake up and feel a strange emptiness, a longing for something he could not name. He wondered about the friends he had lost, the laughter he had given up, and the warmth of family he no longer felt. He thought about what life might have been if things had been different, but the ache was tempered by fear, the fear of being hurt again, of trusting the world and being disappointed once more. He told himself that solitude was better than heartbreak, and slowly he convinced himself that he was fine. Neighbors occasionally noticed his absence. They would see his lights off for days, his mailbox full of unopened letters, and his garden growing wild in quiet neglect. Rumors began to spread. He has given up on life, some said. He must be angry at the world, others whispered, but none of them knew the truth. He was not angry, he was tired. Tired of fighting battles he could not win, tired of being hurt by people he loved, tired of pretending that the world made sense. In his mind, closing the door was an act of survival, a way to protect the fragile pieces of himself that remained. Sometimes he would allow himself to think about reconnecting. A small part of him longed for conversation, for friendship, for laughter again. But the fear was always stronger. He feared judgment, rejection, and disappointment. Every small step toward the outside world felt like a risk too great to take. So he stayed in the safety of his home, day after day, building routines to keep the emptiness at bay. He found solace in books, music, and the slow rhythm of his own thoughts. In the quiet, he could breathe without worry, live without expectation, and sleep without fear. Even his closest family had almost given up. They left letters in his mailbox, knocked politely on his door, and sometimes called, only to hear a brief, emotionless voice on the other side. They didn't understand that his silence was not coldness, it was a shield. Every visit, every conversation required strength he didn't feel he had. He feared that if he opened up, even a little, the pain of loss would come rushing back. It was easier to live in the shadow of the past than to face the possibility of future heartbreak. Friends who tried to reach him often left discouraged. They thought he was stubborn or ungrateful, not realizing that every social interaction felt like a battle for him. People could sense his withdrawal, his quiet avoidance, and eventually many stopped trying. That in turn confirmed his belief that the world was better left outside the walls he had built. He became invisible to many, but that invisibility was comforting. In the quiet corners of his home, he could think, reflect, and slowly rebuild himself without the pressure of the outside world. Yet, even in this quiet life, there were signs of hope. The small garden outside his window continued to thrive, reminding him that life has a way of surviving even in the harshest conditions. Birds would come to feed, and occasionally a neighbor would wave from a distance. These small moments, though fleeting, reminded him that connection was not entirely lost. Deep down, he still remembered what it felt like to trust, to laugh, and to feel joy. These memories were both painful and comforting, a reminder of what he had lost and what he could one day regain. The man had become a study in quiet resilience. Though the world had disappointed him, he had not completely surrendered. He had chosen a life of solitude, yes, but he had also chosen a life of reflection, learning, and slow self-discovery. He had closed his door to everyone, not out of hatred or bitterness, but out of a desperate need to heal. And in that quiet, lonely place, he began to understand something profound. Sometimes, isolation is not about giving up. It is about preparing oneself for a future where one can live fully again. And so, day after day, he lived in silence. He watched the seasons change outside his window, felt the cold wind against the small cracks in his home, and allowed himself to dream quietly about a life that might one day include people again. He did not know when that would happen. He did not even know if it would happen. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a faint flicker of curiosity, an openness to the world he had once turned away from. In this part of his life, he was a man of quiet endurance. The world thought he had given up, but he was simply waiting for the right moment, the right person, or perhaps the right question that could remind him that life is worth opening the door for. And deep inside, beneath the layers of fear and sorrow, he still had the capacity to feel, to trust, and to hope. One cloudy afternoon, as the wind whispered through the trees and the quiet town went about its usual routine, something unusual happened. The man, who had grown so used to silence that even the ticking of his clock was a sound he barely noticed, heard a knock on his door. At first, he thought it was a mistake. Visitors were rare, and he had not expected anyone. Hesitation crept into his chest, and for a moment he considered ignoring it. But curiosity, the tiniest spark that still lingered within him, made him rise slowly and approach the door. When he opened it, he saw a young woman standing there. She was unlike anyone he had ever met. Her skin glowed with a soft, warm tone, and her eyes were sharp, yet kind. She did not shy away from his gaze or frown at his unkempt home. She simply smiled, standing confidently on the worn doorstep, as if she had been expecting this very moment. He had seen strangers before, but something about her presence felt different. It was not intrusive or demanding. It was intentional. Without hesitation or preamble, she spoke a question that would stay with him for the longest time. "Are you looking for a wife, or are you looking for salvation?" He froze. The words were strange, almost confusing at first. He had been alone for so long. He had stopped expecting conversation, much less questions that cut straight to the heart. He tried to respond casually, with a polite smile and a deflecting remark, but she would not allow it. Her gaze was steady, unwavering, and it seemed as if she could see straight into the parts of him he had hidden even from himself. He invited her inside, unsure why he was doing so. Normally, his doors remained closed and his life went undisturbed. Yet that day, something about her presence felt safe, almost healing. She did not speak immediately. She observed the house quietly, noticing small details. The books stacked in careful disarray, the small garden visible through the window, and the faint smell of old wood and tea. There was no judgment in her eyes, no criticism for the years of solitude. She simply noticed, as if she were cataloging the story of his life without words. Then slowly, they began to talk. At first it was small talk, about the weather, about the town, about small daily routines. But even these conversations were different. He noticed that she listened in a way no one had listened to him in years. She did not wait for him to pause to speak herself. She did not nod politely before moving on to her own story. She gave him the space to exist fully, with all the years of pain, loneliness, and hesitation that he carried. As the hours passed, he felt something he had not felt in a long time: relief. Relief that he could speak without fear, without having to pretend he was someone he was not. He told her about his life, about the laughter that had faded, the friends he had lost, and the family that could not reach him despite their love. He told her about his routine, the careful rhythms he had created to survive in his solitude, and the nights when he felt completely empty. He spoke quietly, hesitantly at first, then more openly, as if something inside him had been waiting for a safe place to pour out. She did not interrupt. She did not offer easy solutions or hollow advice. Instead, she shared her own perspective. She spoke of her community, where people learned to survive through trust, patience, and openness. She spoke of traditions that valued listening and understanding before speaking. She told him that pain and loss are not meant to close a person off, but to teach resilience, to remind them of what is truly important. Her words were gentle but strong, like a river carving its path through stone. At first, he was skeptical. He had been hurt too many times. People had left him, betrayed him, or disappointed him when he had given everything. How could one person, one stranger, break through years of self-imposed isolation? Yet, he could not deny the effect of her presence. She carried no judgment, no expectation, and no urgency. She did not demand that he change immediately. She simply existed alongside him, offering a kind of companionship he had forgotten existed. Over the next few days, she returned, not because she needed to, but because she chose to. Each visit was a careful step, a gentle opening of a door he had kept shut for so long. They would sit for hours in silence, sometimes speaking, sometimes simply observing the world outside. She asked questions that forced him to think, to reflect on the life he had chosen and the walls he had built. She asked about his dreams, his regrets, and the moments that had shaped him. Each question was a mirror, reflecting parts of himself he had refused to see. Slowly, he began to understand something important. His isolation had not been protection, it had been avoidance. By shutting out the world, he had avoided confronting his pain, but he had also shut out the possibility of joy. He realized that the life he had built in solitude was safe, yes, but it was not alive. The walls he had built were thick and unyielding, and they had kept out everything. Hurt, yes, but also love, friendship, and hope. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and red, he found himself telling her about the first time he had truly been hurt. He spoke of heartbreak, of betrayal, and of the moment when he realized that life could be cruel and unpredictable. She listened, nodding slowly, her eyes never leaving his. And then she said something he had never heard before. Pain is not meant to make you bitter. It is meant to teach you how to protect yourself while still remaining open. You can be strong and still let the world in. Those words echoed in his mind long after she left that night. He thought about all the years he had spent hiding, all the moments of joy and connection he had denied himself out of fear. He wondered what it would be like to live without such walls, to feel the warmth of friendship, laughter, and maybe even love again. The idea was frightening but also strangely exciting. The next day she returned with a quiet smile, and for the first time he did not step back. Instead, he invited her in, offering her tea and a place to sit. They talked for hours, sharing stories, dreams, and reflections on life. She asked about his childhood, his fears, and his moments of courage. Each question was not meant to pry, but to remind him that he had strength he had forgotten. She did not offer answers, only guidance, and that made her presence even more powerful. As the days turned into weeks, the man began to notice subtle changes in himself. He smiled more often, laughed quietly at her stories, and even ventured outside to tend his garden while she watched. The world did not feel so frightening anymore. He realized that connection did not always mean vulnerability. It could simply mean presence, understanding, and mutual respect. The Apache girl had not come to rescue him, and she had not tried to fix his life. She had come to show him that living, truly living, was still possible. One evening, as they watched the stars emerge in the night sky, she repeated her first question. "Are you looking for a wife, or are you looking for salvation?" This time, he understood it differently. He realized that he had been seeking more than companionship or romantic love. What he truly needed was healing, a chance to reconnect with the world and with himself. The question was not about marriage, but about life. And for the first time in many years, he felt the stirrings of hope. He knew the road ahead would not be easy. Fear and doubt would still visit, and old habits of solitude would tempt him. But for the first time, he believed that change was possible. He began to see the world not as a place of pain and betrayal, but as a place of learning, connection, and even joy. And he understood that salvation, true, quiet, inner peace, could come not from escaping the world but from opening himself to it, one small step at a time. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, he felt lighter than he had in years. His heart, once closed and guarded, had begun to open. He did not know what the future would hold, but he knew that he was ready to face it, with courage and awareness. And somewhere, deep in the quiet corners of his soul, he felt gratitude for the stranger who had knocked on his door, asked a simple yet profound question, and reminded him that life was still worth living. Over the following days, the man found himself thinking about the Apache girl constantly. Her presence had awakened something inside him that he had long forgotten, a sense of curiosity about life and people, and even a faint hope that connection could be safe again. She had a way of asking questions that made him reflect deeply, but never made him feel judged or rushed. Unlike others who had come and gone from his life, she stayed, gently encouraging him to look at the world differently. Their conversations became longer, richer, and more meaningful. At first, they spoke about simple things, the weather, the changing seasons, and the small routines of daily life. She asked about his favorite books and his thoughts on stories he had read long ago. He discovered that speaking about such subjects was easier than discussing the raw pain of his past. Yet, over time, the walls he had built around his heart began to show cracks. One evening, as the sky turned a deep shade of purple and the first stars appeared, she asked him about his childhood. He hesitated. Childhood memories were delicate, sometimes painful, and he had not thought about them in years. But something in her calm, patient gaze made him speak. He told her about the small house he had grown up in, the warmth of his parents' care, and the joy of playing with friends in dusty streets. Then, gradually, he began to talk about the difficult parts, the arguments, the disappointments, and the first experiences of betrayal that had made him question people's intentions. She listened without interruption, her eyes steady and encouraging. She did not offer empty sympathy or try to rush him past his pain. Instead, she helped him see the story of his life as something whole, not just a collection of losses. She reminded him that even in sorrow, there were lessons and moments of courage that had shaped who he had become. Her words were gentle, yet they carried weight, like a hand lifting a heavy stone off his chest. As days turned into weeks, he began sharing more than just memories. He spoke about the relationships he had lost, the friends who had disappointed him, and the family members he had distanced himself from. He admitted that he had closed his door to the world not out of anger but out of fear, fear that he would be hurt again, fear that trust could only bring pain. And for the first time in years, he spoke these words aloud without shame. The Apache girl listened, nodded, and occasionally asked questions that made him think more deeply. "You have carried so much alone," she said one afternoon. "Do you realize how heavy it must feel?" He nodded, but words failed him. He had not considered the weight of his solitude until she mentioned it. It was true. Living in silence had seemed like protection, but it had also been a burden. He realized that he had been surviving but not truly living. The garden outside his window had grown, the seasons had changed, and the world had moved on, yet he had remained frozen in time. Her presence reminded him that life could be more than just endurance. It could be meaningful, joyful, and even healing. Slowly, he began to notice changes in himself. The small routines he had clung to for safety no longer seemed enough. He started opening his door to brief visits from neighbors, letting a few words of conversation enter his home. He laughed quietly at her jokes, sometimes forgetting for a moment the careful walls he had built. The fear that had dominated his life was still there, but it was no longer the only voice in his mind. Her patience and kindness had shown him that he could face the world without being destroyed by it. One afternoon, she asked him about his dreams. Dreams were something he had stopped thinking about long ago. He had convinced himself that ambitions were dangerous because they set him up for disappointment. Yet, as he spoke about small dreams, traveling to a distant town, learning new skills, helping others in small ways, he realized that hope was still alive inside him. It had not been lost. It had merely been buried under years of fear and withdrawal. The Apache girl listened intently, encouraging him to consider the possibilities that life still offered. Their conversations also began to explore deeper topics. She spoke about forgiveness, not just forgiving others but forgiving oneself for past mistakes and misjudgments. She talked about resilience, about how people can face hardship and still find beauty in life. She told him that healing is a gradual process and that sometimes the hardest part is allowing oneself to be vulnerable again. These words struck a chord. For the first time, he thought that maybe he could let go of some of the pain he had carried for so long. One evening, as they sat by the window watching the rain fall softly, he admitted something he had never told anyone. "I don't know if I can trust the world again. I don't know if I can trust myself to be open without getting hurt." She looked at him with calm determination. "Trust is not about never being hurt," she said. "It's about having the courage to face life despite the possibility of pain. Trust begins with small steps, and every step counts." Her words lingered in his mind long after she had left that evening. He thought about all the small steps he had already taken, opening his door, sharing his stories, laughing again, even in tiny moments. Each step was a victory, a sign that he was capable of moving forward. For the first time, he felt a glimmer of confidence in himself, a belief that he could rebuild not only his life, but also his connection with the world around him. The Apache girl never pressured him. She did not demand that he change overnight or that he suddenly embrace the world fully. Instead, she offered companionship, guidance, and perspective. She reminded him that transformation takes time and that healing is not linear. Some days would be easier than others. Some conversations would bring joy, others sadness, but each moment was part of the journey. He also began to notice subtle changes in his surroundings. The garden outside his window seemed more alive, the birds more vibrant, and the sunlight warmer. Even the neighbors who once seemed distant now looked at him differently, as if sensing the quiet shift in his energy. He realized that when he began to open himself, even just slightly, the world responded in kind. Life, he discovered, was not waiting to hurt him, it was waiting to be embraced. One afternoon, while they were talking about the small joys of life, she said something that struck him deeply. You don't have to be perfect to live fully. You don't have to have it all figured out. Being present, being willing to feel, and being willing to try again, that is enough. Her words resonated. For so long, he had demanded perfection from himself, and when he could not achieve it, he had punished himself with isolation. He realized that life was not about being flawless or invulnerable. It was about embracing the imperfections and finding meaning despite them. Her presence had taught him that the door he had closed so firmly could open again, slowly, carefully, but genuinely. By the end of the third week, he felt a remarkable change within himself. He was not the same man who had first locked himself away. He laughed more freely, spoke with more confidence, and even started thinking about small ways to reconnect with old friends and family. He understood that he might still be hurt, and that the future was uncertain, but he also understood that he could face life with courage. He had begun the difficult journey of healing, guided by the quiet wisdom of the Apache girl who had asked a simple yet profound question. And deep inside, he knew something else too. Healing and transformation were not just about himself. By opening himself, he had the potential to influence others positively. He could be present for people who needed understanding, just as she had been present for him. He could offer patience, kindness, and empathy, which he had long believed were impossible for him to give after so much hurt. That realization brought a sense of purpose he had not felt in years. Life was no longer just about surviving. It was about living fully, experiencing, learning, and connecting. The silence that had once defined him was now punctuated by dialogue, reflection, and moments of joy. And with each conversation, each shared memory, and each small act of openness, he grew stronger, not in isolation but in connection. By the end of this period, the man understood that his journey was far from over, but he had taken the most important steps. The Apache girl had shown him that the heart, though fragile, could endure, adapt, and heal. She had reminded him that life was not something to be observed from a distance, but something to be embraced, even with its uncertainties. He no longer feared the outside world as he once had. He had learned that opening his heart did not mean losing himself, it meant finding himself again. And for the first time in many years, he felt ready to continue the journey, guided by courage, patience, and the quiet strength of someone who had shown him that life could be trusted again. Time passed, and the man began to notice subtle changes in his life. The days that had once been filled with routine and silence now carried a quiet energy, a gentle anticipation. He found himself waiting for the Apache girl's visits, not out of dependence, but because each conversation brought new perspectives and hope. For the first time in years, he realized that he had choices about how to live, how to relate to others, and how to face the world that had once seemed so threatening. One morning, after a week of rain that had left the air crisp and the garden shimmering with droplets, he stepped outside. It was a small act, almost trivial, but it felt monumental to him. He walked among the plants, touching their leaves, feeling the soil beneath his fingers, and listening to the gentle rustle of the trees. It reminded him that life continued, regardless of fear, and that he could still be part of it. The act of stepping outside became symbolic, a first step in reconnecting with the world he had avoided for so long. That afternoon, the Apache girl arrived as usual, her eyes bright with curiosity and warmth. She noticed the change immediately. "You've taken your first steps," she said softly, her tone full of gentle encouragement. "And that is always the hardest part. The first step is the one that begins the journey." He smiled, realizing that she was right. For years, he had believed that change required grand gestures or life-altering decisions. Yet, the simplest action, stepping outside his home, letting the sunlight touch his face and feeling the wind on his skin, was proof that he could move forward. He realized that healing was a series of small choices, not a single dramatic moment. Their conversation that day turned toward the world beyond his doorstep. She spoke about the community, about neighbors helping one another, and about the importance of connection. She told him that people often misunderstand isolation, believing it is safety, when in truth it can become a cage. "You are stronger than you think," she said. "But strength is not about being alone. It is about choosing to face life, even when it is uncertain." He listened carefully, considering her words. He realized that she was right. He had spent so many years avoiding hurt that he had also avoided joy, friendship, and meaningful connection. The walls he had built, while protective, had also trapped him in a narrow world where nothing new could enter. And now he felt ready, not perfectly ready but ready enough, to take another step. The next day he decided to act. He would reach out to someone from his past, not to erase the years of distance, but to begin reconnecting. He picked up the phone, his hands trembling slightly, and dialed a number he had not called in years. When the voice on the other end answered, there was a pause, a long, almost frozen moment of silence. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but steady. He apologized for his absence, for the years of silence, and asked if they could meet. The conversation was awkward at first, filled with pauses and gentle laughter, but it was real, human, and alive. For the first time in many years, he felt the warmth of human connection rekindling. Over the following weeks, he continued to make small but meaningful choices. He walked into the local market, greeted the neighbors he had avoided, and even helped a few people with tasks around the community. Each interaction, no matter how brief, reminded him that the world was not entirely cruel and that kindness still existed. He felt a growing sense of empowerment. He could choose to be part of life again, and that choice was entirely his own. The Apache girl continued to visit during this time, offering gentle guidance. She never pressured him, never demanded immediate change, but always encouraged him to notice the effects of his actions. "Every time you choose connection over isolation," she said, "you are proving to yourself that the world is not something to fear, but something to embrace." Her words became a quiet mantra for him, reminding him that transformation was not instantaneous but cumulative, built day by day. One evening, as they watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, he shared his fears. "I worry that I will fail," he admitted, "that I will take steps forward and then lose everything again, that I will open my heart and it will be broken." She looked at him calmly, her gaze steady and unwavering. "Fear is natural," she said. "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward despite it. You have taken many steps already, and each one matters. The world may still bring pain, but it also brings opportunity, joy, and connection. You cannot know what awaits if you never try." Her words resonated deeply within him. He realized that his fear had been both protector and jailer. It had shielded him from hurt, but it had also prevented him from experiencing life fully. And now, guided by her wisdom, he felt ready to take risks again. Not reckless risks, but conscious, intentional choices that allowed him to reconnect with the people and experiences he had once avoided. The next day, he decided to attend a local gathering, a small community event he would have avoided before. His heart pounded as he approached the venue, memories of past isolation tugging at him. But he reminded himself of the steps he had already taken, reaching out to old friends, speaking with neighbors, stepping outside his home. Each memory gave him courage. He entered the gathering slowly, greeted a few familiar faces, and allowed himself to enjoy the laughter and conversations around him. For the first time in years, he felt like a part of something larger than himself. Over time, these actions became habits. He no longer feared the presence of others, though he remained cautious and thoughtful. He learned to balance solitude with connection, recognizing that both were necessary for a healthy, fulfilling life. He found joy in small interactions, a smile from a neighbor, a shared story with a friend, the simple act of helping someone in need. Each experience reinforced his growing belief that life was worth engaging with, and that his heart, though once fragile, could endure and even thrive. The Apache girl noticed his transformation and encouraged him to take further steps. She suggested he explore activities he had abandoned long ago, reading in the library, attending cultural events, or volunteering in the community. At first, he hesitated, fearing failure or embarrassment, but with her encouragement, he tried. And with each new experience, he discovered a renewed sense of purpose and joy. Life was no longer a series of monotonous days, but a vibrant collection of moments to be embraced, learned from, and cherished. One afternoon, while walking through the town square with her, he reflected on the changes in his life. He realized that he had grown stronger, not through isolation, but through careful engagement with the world. Each step he had taken, each decision to connect, each moment of courage, had reinforced his belief in himself and in the possibility of a meaningful life. He understood that transformation is a journey, not a destination, and that the small choices we make every day shape the course of our lives more than any grand gesture ever could. By the end of this period, he faced a profound realization. The walls he had built were no longer necessary. They had served their purpose, protecting him from pain, but they had also prevented him from experiencing the fullness of life. Now he could let them down, at least partially, and allow himself to be open, vulnerable, and connected again. The world was no longer a place of fear, but a landscape of opportunity, growth, and connection. He knew that he would still face challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. Life would not suddenly become perfect, and pain would still exist. But he had learned a crucial truth. Courage and connection can coexist with fear, and choosing to engage with life, even imperfectly, is a form of salvation in itself. The Apache girl's question, "Are you looking for a wife or salvation?" had taken on a new meaning. It was not about romance or companionship alone, but about the deeper need to heal, to reconnect, and to choose life over isolation. He realized that salvation was not something that could be given to him. It was something he could claim through his own choices, through his willingness to engage with the world and with others. And so he continued his journey, guided by courage, reflection, and the quiet wisdom of someone who had shown him that life was still worth living. He had taken his first real steps, faced his fears, and begun to embrace the world again. Each day brought new opportunities, new challenges, and new joys, and he faced them with a heart that was slowly opening, piece by piece, to the life he had once feared to touch. The man had come a long way. The once quiet, closed-off home now felt different, not because of anything physical, but because of the change that had taken root inside him. His heart, once heavy with fear and sorrow, now carried a quiet courage. The walls that had kept the world at a distance were no longer impenetrable. They had softened, allowing life, connection, and even joy to enter in ways he had long thought impossible. It began with small things, opening his door to neighbors, exchanging greetings, sharing smiles, and occasionally lending a helping hand. Each act, though minor, reminded him that life could be gentle and generous if approached with openness and care. And each day he felt a little lighter, a little freer, as though the weight of past losses was slowly lifting. The Apache girl continued to visit, her presence steady, patient, and full of quiet wisdom. She never rushed him or demanded transformation. Instead, she offered guidance through gentle questions, thoughtful observations, and shared stories from her own life and community. Her words encouraged reflection, and her example demonstrated that kindness, patience, and understanding could inspire change. Over time, he realized that she had been showing him a truth he had long forgotten. That life, though uncertain, could be embraced without fear. One day, as they sat together on the porch, watching the sun rise over the horizon, she asked again the question that had started it all. "Are you looking for a wife, or are you looking for salvation?" He smiled softly, feeling the question in a completely new way. It no longer struck him as mysterious or challenging. He understood now that salvation was not about being saved by someone else. It was about the courage to reclaim his own life. It was about the ability to open his heart, to trust cautiously, and to engage with the world without letting fear dominate his decisions. He realized that he had begun this journey not for someone else, but for himself, for his own peace, his own growth, and his own happiness. As the days passed, he found that he could engage with life in ways he had never imagined. He returned to the town market, greeting vendors by name and engaging in light conversation. He attended community gatherings and even volunteered for small tasks, helping neighbors with chores or offering guidance when needed. Each act of connection, however small, reinforced his confidence and reminded him that he was capable of building meaningful relationships again. He also began reconnecting with family members he had avoided for years. The first meetings were hesitant, filled with awkward pauses and careful words. But as time went on, laughter returned to conversations, and old bonds slowly mended. Family dinners, once a source of stress, became moments of warmth and shared memories. He realized that life was richer when shared with others, and that the love of family, though imperfect, was still a source of strength and comfort. Even old friends, whom he had once believed had forgotten him, began to return to his life. Rebuilding these friendships required effort and patience, but he approached each interaction with newfound understanding. He learned to forgive, not just others but himself, for the years of withdrawal and the mistakes of the past. Through these connections, he discovered that people could change, that trust could be rebuilt, and that the world, though sometimes harsh, was capable of generosity, kindness, and love. The man's internal transformation was mirrored in his daily life. His small garden, once a quiet refuge, now became a place of joy and activity. He tended the plants carefully, sharing flowers and vegetables with neighbors. Children in the community began to visit, curious about the thriving greenery, and he welcomed them with a gentle smile. Birds returned to the trees around his home, chirping as though celebrating his renewed presence in the world. The environment reflected the change within him. Life was returning to spaces that had been quiet and still for so long. Through it all, the Apache girl remained a constant, steadying presence. She never took credit for his transformation, never suggested that he owed her anything. Instead, she reminded him subtly that change was the result of choices, courage, and self-reflection. She encouraged him to embrace moments of joy, to confront fears without being overwhelmed by them, and to continue building connections that were meaningful and authentic. One evening, as they walked along a quiet path near his home, he reflected on the journey he had taken. He remembered the years of solitude, the weight of grief and fear, and the walls he had built around his heart. He thought about the moment she had first asked him that profound question, and he realized how far he had come since then. He was no longer defined by loss or isolation. He had discovered strength in vulnerability, hope in cautious optimism, and healing through connection. For the first time, he considered the future not with fear, but with possibility. He could imagine moments of happiness, laughter with friends, shared meals with family, and even the potential for love. These were no longer distant dreams, but attainable aspects of life he could embrace. He felt grateful, not only for the guidance of the Apache girl, but also for his own courage in choosing to face the world again. As months passed, the man's life transformed further. He found himself engaging more deeply with the community, mentoring younger people who sought guidance, and sharing stories of resilience and hope. He became a quiet source of inspiration, demonstrating through his own journey that it was never too late to rebuild, heal, and connect. His home, once a place of isolation, became a welcoming space for conversation, learning, and shared experiences. He also discovered that healing and growth were ongoing processes. Some days were still difficult, filled with old fears and memories that tested his resolve. Yet, he no longer allowed these moments to dictate his life. He acknowledged them, reflected on them, and then returned to the path of connection and engagement. Each challenge became an opportunity to reinforce his courage and resilience. The Apache girl, whose presence had been the catalyst for this transformation, eventually continued her journey beyond the town. She left him with no fanfare, no promises, but a lasting impact that would guide him for the rest of his life. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for her timing, her wisdom, and her unwavering patience. She had reminded him that the key to life was not avoiding pain, but choosing courage, reflection, and connection in spite of it. In the quiet moments that followed her departure, he reflected on the question that had started it all. Are you looking for a wife, or are you looking for salvation? He understood now that salvation was not a person or an external force, it was an internal choice. It was the decision to reclaim one's life, to open one's heart, and to engage with the world fully, even when there was risk involved. And he realized that he had done exactly that. By embracing life, the man discovered a profound truth, that connection, love, and joy are available to those who are willing to take small, deliberate steps toward them. The walls he had once built were no longer barriers, but reminders of the journey he had undertaken, the path from fear to courage, from isolation to engagement, from despair to hope. In the end, he understood that life was not about perfection or certainty. It was about making choices, taking risks, and finding meaning in every moment. He had learned that pain and disappointment are inevitable, but they do not have to define a life. Through courage, reflection, and the support of someone who believed in the power of healing, he had found a new way to live, one filled with openness, purpose, and quiet joy. He continued to walk his path with intention. He nurtured his relationships, participated in his community, and embraced opportunities for learning and growth. The solitude that had once defined him was now balanced by connection and engagement. He found beauty in simple moments, a shared smile, a kind word, the changing seasons, and the laughter of children in the garden he tended. Ultimately, the man had found what he had been seeking all along, not a perfect life, not a flawless relationship, but a sense of peace, purpose, and belonging. He had learned that salvation was not something given, but something claimed through courage, choice, and openness. And he carried that lesson with him, quietly, steadily, as he moved forward into a life that was no longer defined by fear, but by hope, connection, and the endless possibilities of each new day.